Let's talk. They're starting from nothing. What do they go out and get? What do they need? Is it a big investment? Like what's the entry level thing just to get them started?
Is learning to preserve the abundance of each season on your wish list of homesteading skills to learn, but you might not know exactly where to start? Welcome to the Australian Homesteaders Podcast. Today's episode is the absolute beginner's guide to starting canning. And I'm talking to Rachel from Bush Edge Homesteading Australia. You'll find out what you need to know before you start, what you need to buy or can source from around your kitchen already, and how to find tested recipes so you can know that you're creating a safe product to store and eat. Let's go.
Today's conversation is actually on a topic that a lot of people have been asking about in the group and are interested in. There's been a lot of questions around it. So I invited Rachel from Bush Edge Homesteading Australia to chat to us about getting started with canning / preserving for like absolute beginners. Rachel lives in the beautiful Dandenong Ranges in Victoria, where over the past 14 years, she and her family of 4 have been transforming their 5-acre property into a self-sufficient, as possible, homestead, while still bridging a life of full-time work and all that kind of life, that kid commitment stuff that comes along with being a mum. Rachel has worked in environmental management and education for many, many years, even though the face-to-face education part of it had kind of wrapped up during COVID. So in 2022, she started the Bush Edge Homesteading Australia as a way to, I guess, educate and inspire others to start giving homesteading skills like preserving a go too. Hi, Rachel. Thank you so much for joining us.
G'day there.
G'day.
It's a bit different today because I'm not used to being on this side of the camera. Normally I'm hiding on the other side, and it's just the hands on most of the videos. So
That's right. So for those of you that don't know, Rachel has a YouTube channel, Bush Edge Homesteading Australia, and she's kind of famous for just not being on there, being behind the camera. So for many of us, this is the first time we're actually seeing your face. So it is fantastic seeing you. Did I miss out any important bits with your intros?
No, I think that was a really lovely intro. Thanks, Amanda.
You're welcome. I had to, confession, I did have to practice Dandenong a number of times because I kept on saying Dandy Dong or something. And anyway,
No,
I got it
out fine.
I got it in. Cool. All right. So today is canning for absolute beginners, right? A lot of conversation around it in the group. We've got a lot of enthusiastic canning, preserving people within the group, people posting what they've been doing, other people going, oh, I want to get started with this. Or like, I wanted to do this for a long time, but it seems like maybe they don't know how to get started, or maybe there's like, a bit of intimidation around there. How did you start on your journey towards preserving and learning how to do canning?
Yeah, so it was quite a while ago now. I guess I was really lucky that I had a grandma that was one of those people that actually made preserves. So I've got really awesome memories of when I used to go to their property. They're wheat sheep farmers over on the Eyre Peninsula, and we used to go over there and stay over there, and she'd make these amazing lunches where she'd kind of put all this meat and salads and stuff and breads out on the table, and there'd always be kind of the jars of the chutney and the tomato relish and jam. Like the jams and stuff she did were absolutely wonderful. So that's kind of like a memory that I have, and homemade preserves kind of kick that up in me. And when I moved kind of out myself, I was in quite small properties at the start. I was in a flat, so I couldn't really grow much at that stage, and thus, not really preserving myself at that stage. I was still lucky that she would send us home with a few jars. She was still around kind of in those days. But then, kind of after she passed away, there was like a time where I didn't really have access to that type of beautiful food anymore. And about 20 years ago, we moved to the Dandenong Ranges, and in our first property, we had these little cherry plums. And it kind of made me think, it'd be really nice to be able to have those types of preserves again. And hey, I've now got this abundance of these little cherry plums on our property here, and maybe I could start having a bit of a go at doing some of this stuff myself. So I had a bit of a crack at making plum jam. Didn't really know a lot of what I was doing, because as much as I got to indulge in all that wonderful food at her place, I never really learned how to do it from her. Like, I saw bits and pieces. Like, I definitely remember the bottles of the easy sauce and big pots bubbling away. She was like one of those traditional kind of people that just sterilize the jars and pop jams and stuff in. So when I started giving it a go myself, and with those first ones of the plums, that's what I did. And I'll be honest, I lost a fair bit, just kind of like mold and things like that. It wasn't the right way to go about doing it. When I moved to the property that we're on now, which was about 14 years ago, we kind of had a bit of a blank slate here, but I knew I wanted to be able to do more of that sort of thing. Like, we love food in our family, so we started planting so many fruit trees and things like that, and got to the stage where I started getting this abundance of produce, and I wanted to be able to preserve it. And at that time, I wanted to be able to do it properly. I didn't want to lose produce. You work so hard for your produce. So I started doing a bit of research and connected with some awesome Facebook communities, also connected a bit online with the wonderful Megan over there in WA from foodpreserving.org, who, if anybody hasn't found her amazing resources, definitely look her up, because she is a wealth of knowledge and was incredibly supportive to me when I started. And there was some
she just recently joined the group, actually. And
I was so excited when she did.
I did my first canning workshop with Megan in person, actually. So yeah,
I'm so jealous, because back then I was actually reaching out to her and going, they're going to come over the East Coast. And I think she was toying around with the idea of coming to Sydney at that stage. But yeah, I don't know if it ever actually kind of eventuated. But basically I had to do a lot of online kind of research, and people started putting me in touch with some, good resources, like, obviously the foodpreserving.org site. I started looking at National Centre of Home Preservation type resources as well. Got my hands on a ball book, which is an amazing canning resource for anyone that's looking to get started. And I just started kind of learning about the principles of canning so that I could start to do it properly myself.
Okay.
That's, kind of my journey.
Awesome. Yeah, I think even though you talk about your grandmother not actually teaching you, I think there's a lot to be said for just being in that environment and having that experience. I know there was a lot of things I learned how to cook from my mother, even though she never taught me. Like, I remember the smell and the texture, and I remember visually seeing the process and kind of the end result, and it's just kind of imprinted on your mind. So I think there's definitely something there, even if you weren't taught like at the time, there's definitely something still there you take into your adulthood. So earlier I mentioned some people have a real strong desire to start canning or preserving, but they might feel a bit fearful or intimidated, or they're delaying because they just don't know. Is there something to be scared of when you're starting out for the first time?
No, I mean, it's one of those things that I see a lot of people with reservations online express that, they go out and they buy a canner and then it sits on the shelf for a long period of time because they don't get the confidence to actually give it a go. But I can say it's one of those things that is incredibly safe, but you do want to go in with a little bit of knowledge, like with most things in life. And, you even liken it just to something like meat. Like when you're cooking meat in the house and working with meat in the house, you would never go to the shops, buy meat, keep it in your hot car, leave it out on the bench for ages and then eat it, or maybe eat it undercooked sort of thing. Anything in life like that can be dangerous if you don't know a few safety principles. And there are a few safety principles when it comes to canning. But once you know those, it's an incredibly safe and it is a really rewarding thing to do as well. So, I mean, in terms of the safety side of things, probably the key thing to realise is when you're talking about canning, and I suppose we should even talk about the fundamental of what canning is. Essentially what we're doing is we're actually putting food in jars.
Can we just quickly digress and just say, what is canning? What is preserving? Like, we hear these terms. Can we just let's set some definitions, and then let's move on to some safety stuff?
I think that's a really smart idea, because canning's not necessarily a term that you hear commonly used around Australia. So I think sometimes people can get a bit confused about what it is. I think when we relate to cans, we think of a metal can, don't we?
Yes.
And that's not what we're talking about when we're talking about home preservation and canning. We are literally talking about getting food and storing food in jars. So I bought a few props with me, because I always like a good
props.
So,
okay, great.
Basically having food in jars, and what you do is you are heating it up to a temperature that kills off all the baddies, so all those microorganisms that can spoil your food, and you're also creating a bit of a seal when you're doing it as well. And by doing that, it means that the food will last a long period of time and it will be safe to eat.
Okay, can I clarify there? So you've got one part is you've got a process that actually helps eliminate those nasties, and then as a result of that process, you're creating a sealed product that helps prevent like other nasties. I'll just say nasties as a general, so bacteria or whatever, getting in. So you've got that shelf life. It's kind of almost like a two-part thing there.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. So shall we cover like some basics of safety? Does it vary depending on what equipment you've got or what you're preserving or canning?
It definitely does. So when you talk about canning, you can pretty much kind of draw a bit of a line in the middle and go, okay, we've got two different types of food that we might want to preserve. And one sort of food is your low acid foods, and other foods are high acid foods. And I brought some props. So when we're talking about things like high acid foods, we're talking about foods with a low pH. So things like this one here, which is mint sauce. This one here is in vinegar, and vinegar is obviously really acidic. And you've got things like pickles, you've got things like jams that are also acidic as well. And all of those things that are acidic, which is basically at a level of pH 4.6 or less, any of those types of things can be preserved by what's called water bath canning or steam canning. And that's because when you've got acidity in food, it affords you some additional protections. So it particularly stops this one type of bacteria that causes botulism. And that's why you can get away with just kind of boiling in either a water bath canner. So basically a water bath canner can be a big pot with a bit of a rack in it that you put your jars in. You boil them away for a certain period of time, and every type of food has a different period of time depending on what that food is. And basically by bringing it up to kind of that 100 degrees Celsius, it kills off all those bacteria. It also works with the enzymes. You can also have things like molds and yeast and stuff like that in your food as well. And by boiling to that temperature, it deals with all of those things. But what it doesn't deal with is a type of bacteria, as I mentioned before, that causes this botulism that can thrive in environments that have the lower acidity. So you can get away with water bath and steam canning in high acid environments because the acid's going to deal with that bacteria.
Yeah.
But if you're dealing with a low acid food, so anything with that pH that's over 4.6, and that's things like meat, or if you're making stocks, maybe soup or stews. Also, a lot of your vegetables will fall into this category if you're not acidifying them and by pickling them. They'll be in this category. If you've got any of those types of things, and here's another example here, some sweet potato.
Yeah, nice.
If you've got any of those types of low acid foods, you need to use what's called pressure canning. And pressure canning is something like this setup here. I don't know if you can see that properly.
Yep. See that, right.
With the pressure canner, what it does is it builds up pressure in the unit which actually causes a higher temperature than we get by boiling. In fact, it will get us up to a temperature of around 115 degrees Celsius, and that's what's actually going to kill off that bacteria that causes the botulism. So you do need to be really particular about knowing what sort of food you want to preserve. If you are doing, use meats, your other, low acid type foods, understand that you really do need to use a pressure canner. You can't boil and boil. Like, you hear some scary stuff sometimes online of things that people do. You can boil to your heart's content, but you're not going to kill off that bacteria. That's why you need to have it under pressure to get that higher level of temperature that will kill that particular one off. But for your jams, your jellies, your pickles and stuff like that, just getting something boiling to that temperature that you're looking for, or using a steam canner, which is the same kind of principle. It's just that you've got steam moving around your jars instead. That again gets you up to that kind of 100 degrees Celsius mark. That's going to kill off, as I said before, all that regular stuff that you get, but it's not going to kill off that botulism bug.
Okay.
The acidity will deal with that.
Yeah. So if you're in doubt, where do you find safe information about this?
Okay, so there is really, really good information online. What I recommend you do is have a bit of a look at the foodpreserving.org website. Megan's website is absolutely incredible.
Yep.
She is someone that has what I would call the most reputable resource that is Australian. Sadly, here in Australia, we've got the CSIRO, but when it comes to canning, they have very, very little guidance for us. I think they've got a couple of articles. There's one on our vinegars, for example, because our vinegars for canning are a little bit different to American ones. So they have some information that covers that. But for the most part, there's really not a lot of good info from the likes of the CSIRO. So yeah, Megan's website, foodpreserving.org, definite go-to. America does have really good resources. So when you have a bit of a look at the way they do things over there, there's obviously a much bigger prevalence in their population of people that are actually doing things like canning. And therefore, there's a lot more kind of government departments that actually kind of sit behind and support them to make sure that they actually do it in a safe way. Right. Now, we can tap into all of that here in Australia. So that's what I do. So National Centre of Home Preservation is a wonderful site that you can use. There's also some companies over there that invest a hell of a lot of money into doing research, and they have safe recipes as well. So you've got companies like Ball, and if you go to their website, they've got recipes as well. Jardin, which is the Canadian kind of, it's an arm of Ball as well, but they use a bit more metric over there. So that's always handy for us in terms of not converting. Yeah, those types of resources online are really good ones. Do just be a bit careful of some of the online stuff around. I will say, how you asked that question before about people getting scared sometimes about preservation. I think sometimes that's because of some of the stuff that goes around on social media. And there is kind of these extremes of camps that you see where you've got at one end kind of the rebel canners that, are pretty much about protecting their right to do what they want in their kitchen. And you know what? Anyone can do what they want in their kitchen as far as I'm concerned. But there's the other level where you've got these extreme safety type canners, and they are all about, unless it's a tested, proven recipe, then they won't deviate from it. I kind of see those people having battles sometimes online. Yes. And I think some of those extremes of opinion cause some of the fear in those that are a bit less knowledgeable. So what I recommend is kind of stick to the science. For me, probably another thing worth mentioning is my background is also in environmental science as well. So I tend to be a fairly science sort of based person. And for me, what I care about is the understanding that acidity is important. Temperatures are important. Having clean equipment and the right equipment when you do these types of things, that's important. Tested recipes are fairly important to me as well, but I don't think they are always the total be all and end all, because the big companies obviously do pay to get their recipes and things tested. At the end of the day, if we're just looking at the science, it's all about the acidity and whether the acidity is right or not. But I will say in this space, I do highly recommend that everyone does their own research, and you kind of make those decisions for yourself on where you fall in that spectrum. I know where my comfort is with risk. I never want to be sitting there with a jar of something that I ever have any concern about feeding to myself or my family. I want to always be comfortable in what I'm feeding my family. So I probably am a little bit more up the safety side of things.
Okay. So, all right, just assuming that we are talking to like absolute beginners and they're like, you know what, yeah, maybe down the track I can start, making my own decisions about things. But to start with, I want to know the rules before I break them. So where do I find approved recipes? What's a reliable source? You mentioned earlier the Ball Book, and I know that's got like a lot of go-to recipes in it. I know you mentioned like a couple of websites, but like having something like the Ball Book on hand, is that like
is an absolute must for any beginner, I reckon. Okay. Again, there's the websites. So if you're the sort of person that can't get your hands on the book and you want to start learning straight away, you can go to those websites because they have the instructions as well as to good canning techniques. They also have a lot of recipes on those sites as well. Yep. But if you want a physical book, the Ball Book is absolutely incredible because it goes through all that explanation at the start as to why it is so important to have the right gear, have the right acidity. It gives you really step-by-step basic guidance as well on, how do you actually water bath something, or, how do you go about pressure canning things? And it is important to kind of understand those steps, particularly when you're a beginner. And sometimes just having that book sitting next to you is a really good reference as you're kind of going through in your own kitchen step by step. And then they also have some more complete kind of books as well that have more recipes as well once you want to start expanding out from there. Yeah. And they're probably the key ones that I use.
Very good to start. Like just keeping in mind, like we're talking to somebody that is just going, I want to get started with this. What's the first thing what's the first resource or whatever I buy so I can have it on hand? And I know I'm pretty sure last time I checked on Amazon, like the Ball Complete Book was like around the $50 Australian mark. And I believe there's places out there where you can get it like as a digital download. And then you also mentioned Megan's site. So what's important about the Ball Book is it's all in like imperial measurements. And what I appreciated about Megan's preservation.org, foodpreservation.org site is that she's done the testing and done the translations
for us.
Conversions, that's the word I'm looking for. Okay, so we've got a resource. And then of course, if you're in some reliable groups and you know someone you trust, you can reach out for help. Like, for example, if someone was to message someone and say, hey, can I adjust the fig amounts in this recipe?
Like I do that, Amanda.
my canning phoner friend, Rachel. But okay, right. So we've got the book. Let's talk. They're starting from nothing. What do they go out and get? What do they need? Is it a big investment? Like what's the entry level thing just to get them started? Yeah.
I think for anyone that is starting off, your best place to start is with those acidic foods. That it is easier to get into because you can start with pretty much any pot that you have. If you've got a big pot in your house and you get some jars, and we'll talk about jars in a second, but if you've got some jars that will fit in your big pot, and if you will have a few centimeters of water over the top of your jars, and you can get a little bit of either a rack in the bottom, or if you don't have a rack, even just putting a tea towel in the bottom just to lift your jars off the bottom. Any pot that you've got in your house that meets that criteria can be turned into a water bath. Because essentially all you're doing is you're wanting to submerge your jars and boil them. Underwater. But you do need to make sure you've got enough water all the way around.
Yep.
And you want to keep them off the bottom. If you've got them on the bottom, they can get pot spots on the bottom, which can lead to jars breaking. You can also get jostling and things like that, which can break your jars too. So water bath is a great place to start. Big pot is your number one thing.
You might already have that in your kitchen. So after this call, go into your kitchen, raid your pot, see and get some jars and chuck them in there and see whether you're going to have enough clearance on top of the jars to get like a bit of water on top. Yeah. All right, cool. So that's something they might already have. So we've got a book, we've got a pot. We're starting with water bath canning as our kind of like entry into canning. What next?
You definitely need some jars. So
Okay.
of course, if we're going to preserve food in jars, we've got to have some jars. Now, when it comes to preserving jars in Australia at the moment, they can be a little bit tricky to get. I'm going to kind of put that out there right now. They used to be so readily available and so cheap. It's so frustrating now.
I took it like for granted actually, and I'm kicking myself now, just going.
I know, like should have bought so many more jars. But anyway, in terms of jars, you do want to use the right kind of jars when you're doing preserving and even with your water bath canning. And that's because you want a jar that's going to be able to hold up to the temperature. And you don't want to be in that situation where you've done so much hard work. You know, sometimes you might have grown the produce yourself and then you've cooked up this beautiful produce, you put it in a jar and then it breaks or it leaks because you've put, you know, a lug lid on that hasn't, might have been banged around a bit in the past or something like that, and it doesn't actually create a seal and you get water in. And I have had that happen in the past, back before I started getting the gear that I have now. So the right jar is important to think about. There are specific preserving jars around the place.
Okay.
You may have heard of things like mason jars. A lot of the American kind of canning sites and things like that. And even if you look at the Ball Book and the like, they're going to talk about mason jars. And that's jars that are like this one here. So this is one of the ball jars. There's other brands that you can get in these mason type jars. In fact, there's a place called Aussie Mason here in Melbourne that actually makes an Aussie Mason jar. There's Kerr brand. There's a few different ones around the place. Sorry about that, just banging the thing. The thing about these jars is what they've got is a few different pieces to them. And I'm going to pull it apart.
I can see you like trying to do one-handed.
I know. I'm apologising, guys. Like,
I love your shirt.
Technical
Can you
issues
show me
at
your
the
shirt?
start.
So what's your shirt? Look at your shirt.
Oh yeah, I dressed up for you guys today.
Oh, I love it.
It's my canning shirt.
By balls, that means ball jars.
Hopefully I'm not offending anyone out there.
People.
All right, let's have a look at this jar.
All
right. Am I in shot? Here we go.
There's you are. So there's different different jars that have different configurations and like methods around creating a seal, right? So that's
it. So I'll show you a couple of different ones. So these ones here with the mason jars, they've got what's called a two-piece lid. You get this ring here.
Yep.
And then you get a flat lid that looks like this. Yep. And essentially the flat lid has a bit of a rubber seal on it that goes onto the edge of your jar. You then use your ring that goes on the top and that closes it up. And then what happens is when you put that in your water bath, you have this allowance of a bit of air that can get out. As it boils, the air expands, and as you get that expansion, a bit of air goes out. And then kind of when you pull it out again, it sucks in the lid on these ones. So they've got like a little bit of a toppy lid.
Yep.
Hopefully I'm pointing this in the right direction. Sorry.
Yes. So good.
And essentially when that happens, it kind of sucks in and that gives us that seal. So that's the two-piece kind of mason lid type ones.
And then you okay, so you got the mason.
There is other ones.
Right. And then you take the ring off for storage.
Oh, yes.
So people, we're not actually giving you instructions on how to can. We're just like, this is just the gear. You'll find that a lot of recipes you find will have quite detailed instructions about what to do exactly with the jars when. So just keep in mind that this isn't a like how to can something. This is just all the gear to get started and some safety stuff. So okay, great. Sorry, go continue. The ring.
So that's one sort that you can use.
Yeah.
Now I've got another one here, and this is one of the WEC jars. So that's a two-piece kind of lid system.
Yeah.
These WEC jars here are a three-piece system. So with these ones here, you actually get these little clips that hold the lid on.
I love the WEC jars. They're so pretty.
They are gorgeous, aren't they? I'm a bit of a newcomer to these over the last, probably about 18 months or so. And to be honest, until about 18 months ago, I used only mason jars. Okay. But because they have become a bit short in supply, I started using the WEC. And I'm really glad that I did actually, because they are a beautiful jar. Like particularly when you're doing things like sauces, the fact that they have these sauce type bottles is wonderful. So with these ones, what you have is a little rubber gasket, which is this piece here.
That's the seal.
On your lid,
Yep.
first of all, and then that sits on top.
Yep.
Here, and then the little clips go on. And it's exactly the same principle as I said with the mason jar, where you'll heat this up and you get that air that's able to kind of escape a bit, and then it kind of sucks it down at the end as it starts to cool down.
Okay.
So these are the ones that I tend to use.
Yep.
In fact, they are pretty much the only ones that I use. Some people use recycled jars.
With the twist top lug lid. Yep.
And this is what's called a lug lid.
Okay.
So with lug lids, what is kind of recommended is that if you are using recycled, you try and actually discard the lids. You know, once they've sealed in the past, sometimes you kind of lose that rubber that's on the inside of them, and they don't seal again very well. That's why I had those issues that I was talking about earlier in my early days, where I was having a bit of a crack at it, you know, in that method that my grandmother used to use. They just didn't hold. And one of the things that I'm not a huge fan of with these ones is that you can't often tell when it's kind of given way, because with those lug lids, they do hold on. Whereas the thing I love about these sort of ones is I can lift it.
Yep.
And if the lids come loose, it'll lift straight off. And that's the same with the mason ones as well, because, you know, as you were saying before, when you store these, you actually take,
like you have with the sweet potato. See how there's no ring on the sweet potato, people watching?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm guessing, all right, so for beginners, let's say try to source and go for like a made for purpose canning jar. Okay, because the instructions, especially in the ball book or something around that, they'll actually give you instructions around like what part of the lid to put on where and how, like when and what to do afterwards and how to test it. So I would say, would you agree with that? Like to start with something that is just a made for purpose, and so you're not going, oh, is it sealed? Is it not? If you're just starting from scratch.
100%. You know, if you get a proper preserving jar, you know, something like the mason, something like the Wex, you know, you're giving yourself that additional kind of level of security when you're doing it in those early stages and you're trying to work it all out yourself. As you get more confident, you know, you may be confident enough to use the recycled lug lids and things like that as well. You know, a lot of people successfully use them. And I guess I'm just sharing those ones that I use and the reasons that I go about using those. And I think, you know, even though I've done it for many, many years now, I still prefer to use those. If I was starting anyone off from scratch, they are the ones that I would get them to start with at the start.
Now I don't think you use a lot of this brand, but there's an Australian canning jar brand, Fowler's Vicola. And so that is, I just want to put the name out there. I don't think Rachel has an example of that she can show us, but that is almost like a mix between the two. It's but it's more similar to the WEC. It's got a rubber seal. It's got a lid that goes on and clips that hold it down during the processing, and then you remove the clips afterwards. So just as a note for those of you that want to know if there's an Australian brand, there is an Australian brand, so you can go and go investigate that. All right, so let's recap. We've got,
and it would be completely un-Australian of us not to mention the Fowlers, because they are an Aussie jar.
Yes.
The method is a bit different with those though. So as Amanda said, like it's not something that I've done. Ironically, on Monday, I'm actually picking up some Fowler's jars. So finally, I'm going to start entering that space. But it is a different method also to the traditional water bath. It's similar to water bath, but the temperature is a little bit different that you use. It's more of like a slow sterilization over a longer period of time. So keep in mind, it's not just a different jar. If you do Fowler's, there is a bit of a different method to it as well.
Okay, so we have our recipes. So if we've got a ball book, or we've got foodpreserving.org, we've found a suitable pot in the kitchen. We've sourced and ordered some jars. We've kind of got some produce. And what else do we need for that first session?
So the next things are probably not 100% essential, but they are going to make your life way easier and it's also going to make the experience a lot safer for you as well. And that is this baby here.
Oh,
this is called, well, actually, I'm not even sure what it is. I call it the debubbler, but I'm sure there's actually like a proper name for it.
I think that is the name, actually.
There you go. Well, the thing that I probably use this for the most is actually measuring headspace. So I'm not sure if you can actually see it on the screen there, but there's little measurements on each of those little indentations at the bottom. Yeah. And what we do is we actually use that to measure from the top of the jar to the level of food that you put in your jar. And that area there is what's called a headspace. I think actually it's called a headspace tool. I hear that people call it that as well. The headspace is really important. So with every type of food that you'll put in a jar, you need to leave a certain amount of space at the top between that food and the lid. But the amount is always a little bit different because things will expand differently depending on what the food is. So in your recipes, it'll actually talk about leaving a bit of headspace at the top, and a tool like this can help you actually measure it so you get it exactly right. And it does also help with kind of poking your food to make sure that if you've got any bubbles and stuff like that, that you get the bubbles out from between your food as well. So that's one thing. Another thing that will, again, be not totally essential, but will make your life a lot easier is this one here, which is a jar lifter. And what these allow you to do is actually pick up your jars out of your hot water or out of your hot steam canner, and you're keeping your hands nice and clear. And of course, that's going to stop you from getting burned. Now, again, I probably didn't have all the right gear when I started off and was using tongs and things like that. I can tell you now, it's bloody dangerous if you drop it, and these will make your life a lot easier. And the next one is probably more about convenience, and that's a canning funnel.
Yeah.
So this one here is just one that has a bit of a regular neck to it. It can sit in the top of your jars, and then when you're filling your jars up, it just means you don't get splashing and stuff like that. And that can be really handy if you're particularly working with things like hot jams. You know, you don't want to be splashing that sort of stuff on yourself.
Cool.
And it's a lot less mess.
Nice. That's a good little kit. Have you got any other goodies on there that you would recommend adding to that kit?
Well, you can actually buy that as a starter kit. So if you have a bit of a look online, I think this one was actually the ball kit. Now,
the green one.
A very long time ago that I got all of that. But I did see actually Kmart had these starter kits not too long ago where it actually had those pieces and also a few jars in there as well. I think they were the little half pint jars. Yeah. And they were actually selling them for about $15 not too long ago. So that's something to have a bit of a look out for those that are beginner canners. And I think there was also a little rack that kind of lifted jars out as well, that you could insert into a pot that you might have at home yourself. So have a bit of a look out for those ball beginner sets if you are someone that's starting out.
Cool. All right. So we've got our kit. I just want to quickly, before we go into our, and I just want to add one thing that I didn't recap on the kit is something to put on the bottom of your pot. Okay. Simply Off-Grid actually asked, can you use a cake rack, or is it just basically just whatever fits in the pot? Okay. So yes.
Most definitely. If you've got one and it fits, most definitely. That's going to be awesome. It's just about lifting your jars off the bottom.
Yeah. So, and
if you don't have one, tea towel. That is just a wonderful hack, that one. Just fold up a tea towel, put a tea towel in the bottom, and sit your jars on top of that.
All right, so you've got your basic kit. What other pots have you got there? You mentioned a rack. I think you can get like made for purpose or dedicated water bath canning pots. You pointed to your pressure canner in the back. You indicated that you can water bath in that. And then you've got something else there that doesn't look like a pot. Can you explain to me what?
Oh, this one here.
Oh, yeah.
This one or this one?
Oh, either right. I just want people to get an idea of like what they might be able to use as a pot if they need to go out and purchase one.
Let's see if I can open this one-handed.
So,
sorry guys. So this one here that I'm opening at the moment is actually a pressure canner. So this is one here that you can use for those foods that are the low acid foods that you want to do under pressure. But the cool thing about these as well is that you don't have to have a separate water bath canner if you use one of these. So if I take the lid off this one, we have a bit of a look inside. And you see in here, we've actually got a rack on the bottom.
Yep.
So that there, it's just like any big pot. Just because it's got a pressure canning lid doesn't mean you can't use it as a big pot with a rack in the bottom.
Great.
That you can use for your water bath.
Great. Cool. Awesome. So, and the other pot you've got there, that's not a pot, is that for water bath canning or pressure
This one
canning?
here?
Yeah.
This one here is what's called a steam canner. So with these, essentially what you do is you put your jars in here. You then pop your lid on top. And it's got a special little dial in the top of these ones here. And basically what it does is it gets to this zone that's a bit of a green zone when it's built up enough steam in there. And over a period of time, which again will be determined by whichever recipe you're following, it'll actually talk about the processing time in it. After it gets to the green, you kind of start measuring your period of time for processing time. You'll get lots of steam building up inside this unit, moving around those jars that are inside. That heats them up, similar to what we were talking about with boiling them in water. In this case, you're just kind of heating them up with the steam. And that will, again, cause the food to heat up, kill all those baddies that are in it. Things like, again, those bacteria and yeasts and molds and all that sort of stuff. And after the period of time, you'll, again, let it cool down. As the food cools, that lid will kind of contract, as we were talking about before, and that'll create that seal as well. So this here seals pretty much the same way as that water bath canning method that we were talking about before, just using steam instead of using water. Yeah. But I will say these are a lot easier to use because you're not having to lug around big pots of hot water. Also, those of you that are off-grid, you'll probably love the fact that these use a lot less water as well.
Yes.
And I just find it really quick and convenient compared to having to wait until you heat up a lot of water. These you can actually process just a few jars really quickly.
Okay, cool. And just to, I don't know if you mentioned it, but the bottom part is the reservoir where you have the water, and the steam that's created is non-pressurized. So like Rachel said, it's for water bath canning, not for like the low acid foods that you would use in the steam pressure canner. Just to
that is a really important point, because I think sometimes people think that because it has that little kind of dial on the top that maybe this is actually under pressure. You know, obviously there's a little bit of pressure in anything when you're sticking a lid on, but it is not a pressure canner. It is not to be used for pressure canning recipes. It is for use for water bath canning recipes. Cool. And that's an important thing to think about. Like with a lot of the guidance that you'll see around the place, it will only ever really talk about pressure canning or water bath canning. You don't really see a lot of guidance at the moment for steam canning, because steam canners really only came on the market, a few years ago. So that's why you won't see a lot of guidance. If you get one, and they are amazing, highly recommend it. I think I've added to quite a few people's Christmas lists over the last year or so. They are absolutely amazing, but just make sure that when you use it, you're following water bath canning instructions and using it just for water bath canning recipes.
Cool. All right. So for the sake of being like an absolute beginner, maybe start with a water bath pot. Do you need a lid? Does it need a lid?
When you're doing the water bath? No.
Yeah.
No.
Okay,
so
cool.
With your water bath, it's about getting the right boil, though. That's the important thing. You want what's called a rolling boil. So you're not just simmering it. You want to have it as a nice rolling boil. And that's when you know that the water's kind of at that right temperature for kind of processing your food within. Like all of those recipes, they kind of test with the water at that particular rolling boil.
Okay. So if someone's starting from scratch, learning the rules, and then going from there, like with a steam canner or moving on up to a pressure canner. All right. So we've got the pot that's big enough. We've got the rack or a tea towel that goes inside. We've got the appropriate jars. We've got a debubbler or a headspace tool we've got a funnel, we've got a lifter, and general like kitchen stuff like tea towels and bowls and whatever else you need. You've got the recipe of what you're making from a reliable source. So you're looking at a ball book, which is all proven recipes, or for an Australian source, you might look at foodpreserving.org. And that's like a really good start for people. Is there anything else that you would want to add to that before I just quickly jump in and see if we've got any like specific questions?
Yep. I think the other really key thing for anyone that is starting off is to jump online and have a look at videos, because I know not all of us have access to a person that, you can go in the kitchen with that person and they're going to show you the method. But there is a lot of amazing videos and things out there where it almost feels like you have someone in the kitchen with you showing you what to do. And that was how I learned. So it's good to read all of those instructions and things, but I think sometimes just to actually see what things look like, so that if something does look a bit different for you in your kitchen, you know that, oh, maybe that doesn't actually look quite right, or yes, that's right, because I've seen it done that way, and that's going to help, instill further confidence in you doing it yourself.
And there's people out there on YouTube that are recreating like ball book recipes as is. Rachel has a lot of resources on her channel, obviously, because that's why we're talking to her, that make you feel like you're in the kitchen, you're making the recipe alongside her. We'll go on to, we'll talk about where to find you in a minute. But I'm just going to have a look at the questions if you needed to take a quick drink of water after all this talking. So I asked about the cake rack for Simply Off-Grid. Simply Off-Grid also asks what liquid you had in with the sweet potato.
Just water.
Okay, just water. Okay,
yeah,
so
water.
All right, awesome. Robin Todd has a couple of questions. If you're using the CWA cookbook where they would have been cooking in bulk and preserving, would they be considered tested recipes?
Well, that is a really good question. And I'll be honest, I don't have an answer for that.
Okay,
I think fair. The age of the books and things like that will probably come into play as well. Like even with a lot of the ball stuff, if you've got the book before, I think it's like 2016 or something, even those recipes, they turn around and went, oh, actually, some of these weren't actually safe. So I know like a lot of the CWA recipes were probably more traditional type recipes. In saying that, some of those traditional recipes, when you get down to the foundation of it, are quite safe. Like I've got some recipes that I did get from my grandma, and it's funny, fig is actually a fruit that is one of the ones that's lower in acidity. Like we usually are pretty confident that most fruits are acidic foods and we can water bath can them, but fig is actually one that's not. And I found in her recipe, she used to add vinegar to it. So sometimes the oldies actually did know a few things. They might not have known the full science behind it, but maybe someone got sick at some stage and they learned they needed to do these things. But I can't say for certain with the CWA ones.
That's fair. Okay, Jackie asks, can you water bath or pressure can with different jars, e.g. ball jars and fowlers, at the same time, or should you process? Okay, so if you're doing either water bath or pressure canning, are all the jars within that unit or equipment, do they all have to be the same brand of jar?
I've never seen anything that says they have to be, or if there's a risk they're not. Probably the key thing though is the volume of your jars.
Okay.
So with those recipes that we've been talking about, we'll always have that processing time, and it'll say, this many minutes for this particular size jar. So if you've got jars that are different, obviously you always need to be working to the largest jar in terms of your processing times, which then may end up over processing some of the things in smaller jars. So it can come at a compromise to quality. So just from a quality perspective, you're probably better off trying to keep things as like as possible.
Yeah, and always tend towards the maximum processing time. I think I've seen some people that might have like the larger jars, and then they might have a bit left over that won't fit in the larger jar. So they might have one jar in there that's smaller, and they've just accepted that okay, that's just my or they might put it in their fridge, but they might process the smaller jar. So that might be a treat to eat now. Okay, so
strongly recommend, like if you ever get, that bit left over, just whack it in another jar. Don't waste one of your canning lids when you do that. That's where you can just use a normal lug lid or one of these types of lids, because lids as well as jars at the moment can be a little bit tricky to get a hold of. But yeah, pop it in the fridge is probably the safest thing in that circumstance.
So the most important thing there, Jackie, is knowing that different size jars have different processing times. Okay, so I'm just looking for Robin's question 2. I know you can't water bath for pressure canning recipes, but can you pressure can a water bath recipe?
Yes, you can. So normally when you actually look at the recipes, it will actually say this amount of time in a water bath or this amount of time in a pressure canner. So that is actually a really common thing, particularly when you are looking at, the NHCP sort of sites and things like that. I think Megan's got that on hers as well, the options, but definitely the National Centre of Home Preservation and even the Ball Book, quite often it'll have times for both.
Okay, cool. And now Robin had a follow-up question, which was the CWA books not safe or weren't tested? And I kind of feel like if you look at the Ball books, it has all the information in there saying how things were tested. And the CWA books, they have all the recipes, but there's no information around, whether anything was tested or safety measures or anything like that. So that's another hard question to answer as well, because we don't know either way, right?
Well, that's it. You'd need to probably have a bit of a chat with the CWA to kind of ask if they have or they haven't.
Yeah.
My gut feel is the answer is probably going to be no, because we just don't have that type of testing availability here in Australia. Which is a bugger for those of us that are actually really keen into this sort of stuff. And, you want more diversity of things. But, I suspect they probably haven't.
All right, we've got 3 more questions, short questions, and then we're going to start wrapping it up. One, Simply Off-Grid wants to know what you're drinking.
This one here is some of my quince cordial from last year, maybe with a little hit in it. It is a Sunday session.
That's right, it's a Sunday session. Marg wants to know if you can do anything with eggs around canning or anything like that, or maybe just if there's any other preservation techniques you can point her towards.
Yeah, eggs is a tricky one. There's a few ingredients that they don't recommend we can, and usually it's because of issues with things like density, or sometimes it's just because they haven't actually found, a safe processing time hasn't been tested and they just don't have a recommendation for it. But eggs is one that they say not for home canners. Usually things like flours and thickeners and stuff like that, except for one called Clear Gel. There is actually a thickener called Clear Gel, which is tested. But yeah, for eggs, no. So with eggs, what I do is actually put them in the freezer. You don't want to just pop them straight in the freezer though. Scramble them up first, otherwise you end up with yolks that are rubbery and pucks. But if you scramble them up, put them in ice cube containers, and pop them in the freezer. That's a good tip.
Awesome. That might be a good question for the group in general, because I'm sure there's a few different approaches that you could take in regards to preserving eggs. So yeah, that'd be a really great discussion in the group. So I'd encourage
if we could get a freeze dryer here, that'd be the ultimate.
Freeze dryer. I think there's something called water glass. There's water glassing, there's pickling eggs, I think there's a range of things. So find out in the group what people are doing and get some firsthand experience around that. Okay, so all right, Louise is asking about the title of the Ball book. I will put we'll get some titles and links and stuff and put them into its own post or into the comments under this video. So just give me a little bit of time to get back to you on that. Sharon asked about the Kilner jars. Corey mentioned they're kind of a UK version of the Ball jars. So again, just look for that kind of dedicated, made for purpose jar if you want to start start with the rules and then go from there. Everyone's like, oh no, she's going to have to ask all the questions. Thank you for answering. You're welcome, Marg. Okay, so Kat would love a freeze dryer. So someone asked,
call up Kat.
My last question is, where is it? The Choco question. Can you water bath Choco, being that it's a fruit? Choco. Do
I
you have chocos there? It's not common here.
I don't even think I've eaten one of those. So
Okay. Joanna, I don't think we can answer
that
that question for you. So maybe check foodpreserving.org or I'm not quite sure. Like Rachel said, it all comes down to kind of the acidity. So that might have to be something that you can research for us and let us know. Cool. Oh, wow. Okay. We are coming up to 1 hour, so I am not going to take any more of your Sunday afternoon. I just want to say a massive thank you for spending this time with us, sharing your knowledge, and all your demo pieces and answering all the questions. It was so appreciative, and I want to thank you a lot. Can you let people know where they can get more of Rachel online and where they can find you?
Yep. So probably the best spot is the YouTube. So we've got Bush Edge Homesteading Australia YouTube channel. And the idea with that is really just about showing you guys different things that we do in a way that hopefully gives you the confidence to give those things a go yourself. There is quite a few canning videos in there as well that will hopefully help. Instagram, I'm on there as well. So often there's little snippets of bits and bobs that we're up to kind of in between the videos, and very similar with Facebook as well.
Awesome. Wonderful. Okay. Well, if you don't have any last things you want to add, we will jump off our live now, and hope everybody enjoyed it, and we will see all you guys in the group. Okay. See you, everyone.
Thanks a bunch, guys.
Thanks for joining us, folks. You can find Corey and myself at Rockpile Off-grid Homestead on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. And remember to head over and join the Australian Homesteaders community, and we'll catch you on the next one. Bye for now.